Hello and welcome to Home with Sarah Jane. Today I have a homeschooling video for you, but today's video is a little bit different. Today I wanted to share my personal opinions on a certain curriculum that we had started using at the beginning of this school year with my 5th grader and why we stopped using it. Kind of like the pros and cons for us. I'm not saying don't use this curriculum. I just wanted to share our experiences and the things that I liked about this curriculum and the things that I didn't like about this curriculum and why we stopped using it. So if you're new here, hello and welcome. My name is Sarah and I'm a homeschooling mom to 2 girls, ages 10 and 14. And if you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much for stopping by once again. So the curriculum that I'm talking about is Beautiful Feats Around California with Children's Books, A History of the Golden State for Intermediate Grades. So I kind of want to share a little bit of a flip through so I could kind of show you what I'm talking about with some of the pros and cons. But with this curriculum, when I bought this, it is a literature-based curriculum, and I thought that we were going to love this because of that. We're huge readers. We love to use living books to learn, but I just felt like it kind of fell short for me as a teacher, you know, the teacher's guide of it, and for my daughter as well. We were pretty bummed out, honestly. I was pretty bummed out that this didn't work out for us because I love the idea and the concepts behind this curriculum, and you can see that a lot of work went into this, but it just didn't sit right with us. It didn't fit for us, and so we ended up stopping this during first quarter of this school year. So I just kind of wanted to share my thoughts, my opinions on this, and please keep in mind that this is my opinion on this curriculum. It does not make this a bad curriculum. I'm not trying to bash any curriculum out there because, you know, if you're a homeschooling parent, you already know not everything is going to work for you. Not everything's going to work for your child. And, you know, when you homeschool, things are just so personalized. You know, you can personalize everything. And this was just something that did not fit the learning style to my child or the teaching style for me. So let's kind of talk about this curriculum. So with this one, you have this wonderful teacher's guide. I thought it was a very beautiful teacher's guide. I liked that it was full color. I liked all of that. And it also came with a whole bunch of books, so which was the part that I thought that we were going to love. So let's talk about the books that go with this specific course. And this one it's a history of the Golden State. So this is supposed to be like the history of California. So we live in California. I thought that this would make it an incredible like state study for my child, since usually around 4th or 5th grade, kids tend to learn about their home state. So I thought this would be the perfect fit. Didn't quite work for us. So let's talk about the books that come with this course. These are in no specific order, but these are the books that are included to go along with this course. So the first book we have is Esperanza Rising. This is a really fantastic book. I have read this one before and we loved it. My daughter loved it. And we'd actually read this before we even picked up this course. So she was already familiar with this book and I was totally okay with rereading this book to her because she had enjoyed it so much. So that wasn't a big deal for us. But yeah, so the first book is Esperanza Rising. Who Was Steve Jobs? And these books aren't super long and they do have some pictures in them. Who Was Walt Disney? Riders of the Pony Express. This is another really fun book. By the Great Horn Spoon. This is one that we had already read before and we really enjoyed this book. It was just a really silly book about the gold rush. California Indians. The Forest in the Trees. Again, we did not get through all of these books because we did not finish this course. But the ones that we did go through, we liked most of them. Like this one, my daughter really liked. Once Upon a Mastodon, all about prehistoric mammals. She really liked this book. It was cute. But there was only, I think, one that we read that she really didn't care for before we stopped this course. And this is the book, Adopted by Indians, A True Story. So this is the book that we had finished up and then decided we were going to change the curriculum, not because of this book, but this book kind of didn't help. It just really didn't capture her attention. She didn't really get into this book. Not that this book was necessarily bad, it just, she didn't care for it. So there is that one. And then John Muir, America's First Environmentalist. With Open Hands, A Story of Biddy Madison. Patty Reed's Doll, The Story of the Donner Party. California Pioneer. The Cruise of the Arctic Star, A Voyage from San Diego to the Columbia River. Coolies. This book we actually read for Chinese New Year this year, or Lunar New Year. We did really enjoy this book. It was a really good story. Junipero Serra, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but this is Junipero Serra, founder of the founder of the California Missions. The Story of California. The Discovery of the Americas. Song of the Swallows. And we have Locomotive. This one looks like a really beautiful book. I was kind of bummed we didn't get to it. I think I need to find a way to use this book in my homeschool because it does look like a really nice book. And I already have it. Okay, and then there are two books that I actually lent out, so I don't have them, but I will insert a picture. And that is Island of the Blue Dolphins, which is a book that we really, really love. And then the second book that I don't have here was called Blue Willow. I had never read that book before. I don't even know what it's about, but I know it has something to do with California. But those are the two books that I didn't have to show you. Okay, so let's talk about the teacher's guide now. And this is Around California with Children's Books, A History of the Golden State for Intermediate Grades. I thought that this book was extremely beautiful. I really did enjoy the full color photos that were in this teacher's guide. Now, the first section is the table of contents. This goes over the 7 sections that you're going to be teaching throughout this course. And those sections are Section 1, the Ice Age, Section 2, the California Indians, Section 3, Discovery and Exploration, Section 4, the Mission Era, Section 5, Pathfinders and Pioneers, Section 6, the Gold Rush and the Transcontinental Railroad, and Section 7, the 20th Century to Contemporary. Now, when it came down to what they were teaching in this course, I did really love that aspect of it. I did love what they were going to be covering. I did not love the way that we were supposed to teach it. So I had no issue with what was being taught. It was more about how it was being taught that I had some issues with. So I do want to say that this course is supposed to be taught over 1 year, and it's supposed to be taught 2 to 3 lessons per week so that you can complete this course in a year. That scheduling was perfectly fine for us. I actually really love that scheduling. I normally teach history 2 to 3 times a week for my kids anyway, so the scheduling wasn't the issue, and what was actually being taught wasn't the issue. So now if you keep going into this book, you have like a little welcome letter, and then it goes into nature studies, timeline figures, the California story poem that you'll be referencing throughout this course, and the California map. So this page is just a supplies list. So this is all the items that you're going to be needing to complete this course, which I do really appreciate because I love having all of the supplies in one area so that I'm ready to go. And then here's just a little section about how to actually use this guide, which I did appreciate. This is a very Charlotte Mason inspired teaching method, and we're not necessarily against Charlotte Mason teaching, but it's something that we only do sometimes. So the approach being Charlotte Mason is kind of what didn't work for us in here. Again, I think that this is a beautiful course for a lot of kids and a lot of families, but this way of teaching for history specifically did not work for my child. So now it's talking about the notebooking that your child will be doing. And then these are the books that you are going to be using in the course, which I already shared with you. And then here's the poem, I Love You, California. This poem is going to be referenced back to throughout the course. And then you go into section 1. So section 1, like I was saying earlier, is the Ice Age. And you can read through this section here as the parent or teacher. And then you have 2 lessons that you will be completing in this section. In my opinion, I thought that 2 lessons was not enough to cover the Ice Age. So I was a little bummed to see that there was only 2 lessons in this section. So again, that's my personal opinion on that. I wish that we could have had more time in the Ice Age because it is a really fascinating time and it is something that my daughter was really interested in. Now, to go with these 2 lessons, you do get the nature connection and the library connection. And my daughter really, really loved the nature connection in this course book. So let me read you lessons 1 and lesson 2 so you could kind of get an idea of how this course is set up. So in lesson 1, it says, read pages 1 through 13 of The Discovery of the Americas by Betsy, I think it's Maestro. Study the map on pages 6 through 7. Discuss how changing climate caused the migration of people from Asia to North America. What were the various tribes seeking? If you own a globe, have your student locate this region independently and then discuss. When the large game animals died out, how did the people's lives change? Once the people began to settle in tribes, what significant changes began? So basically what you do is you read a certain section of the books that they had mapped out for you, and then you can look at a map, and then you just ask questions, to your child and have your child answer those questions. Now, I think that's great, but I just didn't feel like that was enough. It wasn't what I wanted. So now lesson 2, it says, read Once Upon a Mastodon. This book makes a perfect introduction to many of the animals studied in this section. When you finish, begin working on the nature connection. Have the student cut out, color, and paste each animal in the notebook. Read aloud part 1 of the poem, The California Story, that's on page 77, included in this guide. If desired, have the student copy 1 4-line stanza of the poem into their notebook each day. Now, again, it talks about making the nature connection, and again, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 4 different nature connections on this page. One of them being the mammoth, the saber-toothed cat, the ground sloth, and then the western camel. Now, my daughter loved the nature connections. She did not love that it wasn't really scheduled out in a way that felt, the way that it was scheduled, it felt like a lot of work in one day, is what I guess I'm trying to say. So because it says here, have your child start working on the nature connection, but when is she supposed to finish the nature connection if she wants to do them all, if there's only 2 lessons in this book, and then we move into the California Indians? So it just felt like if we wanted to complete all of the nature connections, there just wasn't enough time. And she didn't like that about this course because the nature connection was her favorite part. So I wish that these were scheduled out a little bit better, especially because there's videos that you can watch that are included, that they give you, the reference to the video and things like that, and she loved it. Now, if you're only going to choose like 1 nature connection, I can understand how that would fit, but this was my daughter's favorite part, so she wanted to actually do all of these, and it just felt like we didn't have time. Now with the library connection, it wasn't scheduled out into the course either. It was kind of like, if you want to dive deeper, here's some options, which I did love. But because the lesson started to feel so long, we couldn't even get to this. So for us, it didn't work out because we felt like it wasn't scheduled enough. And it wasn't scheduled. It would have been nice if they would have done in lesson 1, okay, start working on the nature connection and complete 2 animals. But it didn't even tell us to start the nature connection until we got to lesson 2, and there's only 2 lessons in this section. So she would have had to do all 4 of these, and if she wanted to watch any of the videos, it would have made this lesson hours long. So I just didn't like the way that it was scheduled out for this section. And let me just show you as well. The nature connection came with images in the back of the book. So there was the nature drawings and what your child's supposed to do with this nature connection. Now, the Ice Age pictures are gone because we did use them, but this is just an example from ones that we didn't use. So when we did the mammoth and the saber-toothed cat and the ground sloth and the western camel, we pulled out the page, cut the images out. She glued them in her notebook or her journaling notebook. She colored the picture, and then she would write a couple of sentences about each animal that she learned about. That was totally fine too. She's not a big notebooker or journaler, so that wasn't her favorite thing, but she really enjoyed learning about the animals. Now, let me just say, this is a small complaint, totally something that you can, work around, but these pages are not easy tear. And if you have more than one student and you're tearing these out of your book to make copies, this book falls apart. So what I was finding is that when I would pull a page out, the binding over here would become very loose, and it started to make this course book fall apart. So I would have preferred to have these either easy tear or even not connected in the book. Like, they would have just sent you a packet of these. Now, what I was able to do is I was able to contact the company and have them email me the PDF download to these, but I just felt like I mean, again, it's a small complaint. I just felt like I shouldn't have had to email them because I'd already purchased the course. They could have made these easy tear to where the book didn't fall apart when you pulled the pages out. Now, also I want to show you back here that this is where you're going to find your California timeline images. So anytime it references, the timeline, you would go back here and find the image that you need. And then back here is also your map of California, the Golden State. So this you would have torn out and kind of taped together for your kid to do the mapping activities. Now again, I would have preferred for these to be either mailed to you loose with the course book, or they could have just included a link for a PDF download instead of having them in the back of this book, because it was really hard to pull these out in a nice way and make copies, especially if you had more than one child. So there's that, but again, that's not a huge complaint. It was just something that was a little bit more tedious for me. So again, with this first section, I didn't like that it was only 2 lessons, and I didn't like that they didn't better schedule out this nature connection into the course. So that wasn't a huge deal. It's just, when I buy a curriculum that's already put together and I'm thinking is going to be sectioned out, I don't want to have to think about when I'm going to try and add this in. I would have preferred for them to tell me when to do these, and then I can make up my mind whether or not I want to, if that makes sense. So, but again, some people might like having more freedom to where they can choose when to schedule those out, but for me, I wanted something a little bit more open and go where I didn't have to plan it out myself. So not a huge deal, again, not a huge deal, but it was something that kind of got in the way in this course for us. So now we're in section 2, the California Indians. And again, this one, let me see, you have 11 lessons. No, you have 12. How many lessons? Okay, yeah. So in section 2, you have 12 lessons, and lesson 1 was fine. Now, we didn't complete this entire course again, so I could only really talk about the first 2 sections. But in section 2, it goes lesson 1, and it tells you to start reading Island of the Blue Dolphins, which is a fantastic book. I really love the book choices in this curriculum. But it tells you to read Island of the Blue Dolphins, and it tells you to try and make literary connections as you read this book. So I think that's great. It's kind of tying in like some language arts, and I love when curriculums do that. But it has you read the author's note. It has you look at the map of California, and you're supposed to locate the islands that they are referencing in here. And then it goes into you reading chapters 1 through 5 of Island of the Blue Dolphins. That did feel like a lot of reading. Again, this is a literature-based curriculum, so a lot of reading is kind of what you would expect from a course like this, but it just felt like so much. I wish that they would have been able to kind of, even if they wanted to keep that kind of reading, I just wish that they would have better scheduled the nature connection into the lesson, because by the time we got done reading the 5 chapters, answering the questions, doing the map work, the lesson, it was long, and it felt like we couldn't make it to these nature connections. So for us, there was just a disconnect there. We didn't really like the lesson setup, so that was really challenging for us to look past, because it wasn't just in a way that it was being taught, it was also the way that my daughter likes to learn didn't match with this way. She told me that this course felt like we were just reading a story and answering questions. She wasn't linking it to history in the way that I wanted her to. So again, that's a very personal reason why we didn't like this. If your child learns in that way of just stories and questions, that's great. And again, I did like that there was some map work and the notebooking and things, but it felt really long. So it felt really, really long. I felt like doing these lessons 2 to 3 times a week, it took us a really long time to get us through these lessons. So, and then you go into lesson 2, and again, it talks about reading chapters 6 through 10 of Island of the Blue Dolphins, and then you have questions that you ask your child, and then it goes into, oh no, that's it. That was lesson 2. So you just read those chapters, and then if you have time, you could do the nature connection. So again, I would have preferred to have the nature connection and the library connections better scheduled into the course. I didn't like that it wasn't as scheduled and organized as I thought that it was going to be, so that became an issue for me. And again, the rest of these lessons are pretty much like that, only after you're done reading Island of the Blue Dolphins, you move into a book called Adopted by Indians, A True Story. And again, the setup is the same, only you're reading a different book. Now, something I didn't mention though is that when you are reading these stories, you will occasionally go through and read the nonfiction component that goes with this. And for this section, it was California Indians, that book. Now, I didn't like that this book wasn't scheduled out. So what they did is they scheduled out like Island of the Blue Dolphins, the story, but they didn't schedule out California Indians. They literally just tell you, read a couple of pages each day. I didn't like that. I wanted something to tell me how many pages to read or what pages to read that would better go with what we were talking about in the story. Another reason why I didn't like that this wasn't scheduled out is because it made me feel like I then had to go through this book and figure out how much I had to read each day in order to have this book done by the time this section was done. So I just kind of had an issue with the way that they scheduled some of the things, but not all of the things. And this book wasn't like an optional read. It wasn't like, if you have time, do the nature connection or do the library connections. It was literally a part of this course, but it wasn't mapped out for you. So I did have a major issue with that. Again, that's a very personal issue. And it was because for me, where I'm at homeschooling history, I wanted to be told what to do, what to say, and have it completely mapped out so that I didn't have to worry about trying to add things in. So that's why I had an issue with this curriculum. And again, it's a very beautiful curriculum, and I did like that it had all of these connections that you could be making with your student, especially the nature ones. My daughter loved these. I love that they had the videos. I love that they even had a culinary connection in this unit where you could bring in food. I love that. Now, again, it wasn't scheduled into the lesson. So this is something that you would have just found time to do. And for me, that's not what I was looking for when I bought this course. Again, I wanted something more scheduled out for me. So now you would be moving into section 3, which is discovery and exploration. We did not do this section because we had stopped after section 2 and we had switched curriculums. So now all I'm gonna do is just kind of show you a flip through of the rest of this guide so that you can see this guide a little bit more up close and personal. So in section 3, you have 6 lessons in section 3, and this again is going over discovery and exploration. You still have your library connections, your nature connections, and your field trip connections. Again, I loved that they added this in. We just didn't make it to this part of the book because we didn't like the way it was being taught. Again, my daughter felt like this course was just story time. She told me it felt like we were doing morning basket. So that became an issue for me because if she felt like we were just doing morning basket, she wasn't grasping the history component that I wanted her to. And, you know, that became an issue for me. So now there's your culinary connection for section, what was that, 3? Now we're moving into section 4, and this is the mission era. Now in this lesson, or in this section, you have, how many lessons? You have 5 lessons in section 4, the mission era. Again, there's field trip connections. Talks about Santa Barbara Mission and City Hall, library connections, and nature connections. And then you also have your culinary connections. Section 5, Pathfinders and Pioneers. It's kind of broken up a little bit differently. So you have 5 lessons while you're reading a certain book, The Cruise of the Arctic Star, and then you have another 6 lessons as you're reading Patty Reed's Doll, and then you have another 7 lessons while you're reading, what was it? California Pioneer. So this one does have more lessons in it, and I think that that's great. And this still has, you know, library connections, nature connections, and field trip connections, and your culinary connections. So that one was a little bit more, I feel, thorough maybe, because you're reading multiple books and having all of these lessons with that. So that I feel like I would have enjoyed more, but again, it was still the approach and how it was being taught that I didn't enjoy in this book. So now in this section, it's the Gold Rush and the Transcontinental Railroad. So in this one, again, you're reading by the Great Horn Spoon. Sorry, my dog is going off. Let me see if he's gonna stop. Okay, so in this one, you're reading by the Great Horn Spoon. That was a fantastic book. So no complaints about the book choices again. But in this one, again, I didn't like that it was like lessons 1 through 5 for the Great Horn Spoon. And then it was like lessons 1 through 3 for John Muir, America's First Environmentalist. I kind of like when it just lays out lessons like, you know, 1 through 80. I feel like would have been better for me. But again, that's just personal preference. And again, in this section, you still have your library connections. You still have, oh, this one's nice. You have, you know, a connection with people, field trip connections. And then you go into With Open Hands, a story of Biddy Madison, and you have 3 lessons there. And then you have 2 lessons on the Transcontinental Railroad here. Oh no, sorry, you have 5 lessons of the Transcontinental Railroad, which, you know, we never made it to. So here you have your historical connection to the San Francisco earthquake, which I think is great. But again, I wish that these could have been a little bit more tied into the lesson. And then your nature connection and your culinary connection. Next section was the 20th century to contemporary. Again, it just maps out what you're reading and when, and then you're answering questions. And then you're doing some notebooking and journaling along with all of these lessons that I'm talking about. So again, this one section had 7 lessons for the book The Story of California and Blue Willow. You have your library connection, and then you go into Esperanza Rising, which another fantastic book. And this one you have 5 lessons. So remember, when you're reading these books, it is a lot of reading in one day. So again, it's a literature-based curriculum. You have to expect that. And it wasn't necessarily even if we had to read that amount in a day, it made the lessons so long that because the nature connection and the library connections weren't tied in, it just felt like we could never get to them. So that part just made it kind of a bummer for us. But again, this section continues to have the library connections. And then you have lessons on Walt Disney, Steve Jobs. You have your culinary connection. And then this is the California Story poem that you would be breaking apart and reading throughout this whole course. Okay, and then this is just like some answer key components for like questions and things. And then again, you go back into the journaling part of this book. So again, I think that this is a really great curriculum. I think it's very beautiful. My dog decided to join us, if you could see his little face. Anyway, so to sum this curriculum up, I did want to say that this was a very beautiful curriculum, that I do think that this would have worked out if I would have maybe started my homeschool journey with a curriculum like this, where my kids didn't have like that other type of history, you know, expectation about how to learn history. If they didn't have all of that with a more structured feel, I think that my daughter would have liked this one. But to just sum this up, sorry, my dog is moving. To just sum everything up, I just wanted to say that although I felt that the lessons could be extremely long in this course, and it felt like a lot, it still didn't feel like enough. And I know that that's like a contradiction, but it felt like it was a lot of reading with just busy work. And we're not really a busy work type of family. We're more of a hands-on learning family, and this did not feel very hands-on without the nature connections and the culinary connections. And again, because some of these lessons were so long, we couldn't even make time for those connections. So that was one of the complaints that my daughter had. And also for me, For me, I felt like this was not scheduled enough for me. I felt that I wanted something more scheduled, and then I could have taken the time to cut pieces out if I wanted to. So for me, I would have liked to have the option of it all being scheduled instead of me having to think of when to fit everything in. So again, she wasn't really connecting the history aspect that I think that she was supposed to be grasping with this course, because she looked at it as more like a story time, and that was it. And by the time we got to the second section, the amount of notebooking that she was doing just to try and keep up with trying to, do the nature connections and things like that, she felt was overwhelming. And that's when I kind of decided that, yeah, we needed to look for something else. So I did just want to mention that those were kind of the deciding factors. I felt like she wasn't retaining any type of history with this course, but she did enjoy like a lot of the stories. But again, that's something that I do in morning basket time. So this course felt very much like a morning basket to us. And again, that doesn't make it bad. It's just a different style of learning. And we prefer something more structured when it comes to history. So I did want to mention what we switched to. And again, this is not sponsored or anything like that. This is just my personal opinion. But we switched back over to the Good and the Beautiful history. Now, we had already completed history years 1 through 4, and I had no intentions on switching back. But because we were making a switch in the middle of the year, or not even in the middle, during first quarter, I decided to go ahead and give this a try again. Now, when we first went through year 1, my daughter was in the 1st grade. So I do feel like this is a good program for her right now, because she was in the 1st grade. She probably forgot half of this. So so I think it's great to go over it again. And she did like the setup of this curriculum better. So I had no intentions on actually going back and restarting the program at year 1. But then I was thinking about it, and my youngest daughter even said, "Mom, she really didn't like this course." And I said, "Okay, well, what is it that you don't like?" And she said, "Mom, I don't like any of it." She goes, "I don't like just reading a story, and I don't like doing notebooking." And I said, "Okay, well, The Good and the Beautiful, you have a story and you have like worksheets and things like that. And she goes, yeah, I know, Mom, but I like that better because I get to learn more facts about history. And I was like, oh. So she was really just missing that more structured style of history. So that's what we went back to. We went back to the Good and the Beautiful History Year 1. So again, I did really enjoy a lot of what this curriculum had available to me, like with the nature connections and the culinary connections. I like that they had like videos already picked out for me to where I didn't have to do the research. But it just didn't feel like a history course, and my daughter wasn't linking the stories with history, so it just felt like story time opposed to history for us. So that was my main issue with this course. And again, it doesn't make it a bad course. It just means that the way that I like to teach and the way that my daughter likes to learn just wasn't this way. So again, I'm not saying this is a bad course. It just didn't work for us, and that's okay. I just wanted to give my opinion and some of the pros and cons that I found with this course. So if anybody else was maybe questioning whether or not they wanted to do this, or if they, wanted to see inside of this course before they bought it, they could come here and see that. That is all I have for you today. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comment section. Thank you so much for stopping by. You have a great day. Bye.